The sound wasn't a scream. It was heavier than that, duller, final. A violent impact from behind the locked master bathroom door while the shower still ran. For 23 years that door had always been locked. Always. I had learned not to question it, not to touch the handle, not to wonder why a marriage could exist with one room I was never allowed to enter. But when I knocked and got no answer, when I pressed my ear to the door and heard only weak movement against tile, something inside me broke loose. I realized the habit I had respected for decades had turned into an emergency that might kill my wife if I kept honoring it. What I didn't know, what I was about to see when that door finally gave way, would rewrite our entire marriage, expose a lifetime of hidden pain, and force me to confront how deeply someone can suffer in silence, even beside the person who loves them most. Before I continue, I need to ask something personal. If you've ever carried a secret that shaped your entire life, please stay with me. Consider subscribing, not for me but so these stories reach people who feel unseen. And if you've lived through something similar, share it in the comments. Knowing someone else understands can matter more than we admit. I stood outside that door longer than I should have. Long enough for memory to stack up behind me like old furniture I had learned to walk around. 23 years of marriage teaches you the shape of another person's boundaries. Hers had always been firm, polite, unquestioned. The bathroom door locked from the inside every morning and every night. Showers taken in silence. No shared mirrors. No casual interruptions. I had told myself it was modesty or habit, or something formed long before me that wasn't my place to disturb. The sound inside changed. Not a crash anymore, but a faint dragging noise like skin against tile. That was when routine lost its authority. I knocked again, harder, called her name, felt my own voice sound wrong in the hallway. There was no answer, only a shallow movement that told me she was alive but failing to get up. I tried the handle. Locked as always. I leaned my shoulder into the door once, then twice, careful at first, still negotiating with the past. The frame held. The third time I didn't hold back. Would split. The lock tore free with a sound that felt like something breaking open inside me as well. In one motion, decades of restraint gave way to urgency. Steam rolled out when the door swung inward. The bathroom looked ordinary at first. Fogged mirror, water still running, bath mat pushed out of place. Then I saw her on the floor. She had fallen hard. One leg bent beneath her, an arm braced awkwardly against the tub. The shock of the fall had stripped away the careful order she always kept. She was trying to move, trying to cover herself even before looking at me, more focused on being seen than on the pain that must have been spreading through her body. I crossed the room without thinking. I shut off the water, grabbed towels, worked the way you do when instinct takes over and thought becomes secondary. I covered her first, not because she asked but because it was the language she had always spoken. Even then she kept pulling the towel higher, twisting slightly away, her breathing uneven. It was only when I knelt to help her sit that I saw what the fall had exposed. Her back, fully visible for the first time in our marriage, was not marked by injury from the bathroom. The skin was old, altered, scarred in wide, uneven patterns that told a story no accident could explain. The sight stopped me cold. Not because it was shocking in its appearance but because of what it meant. Because suddenly the locked doors, the darkness, the distance all rearranged themselves into something heavy and unmistakable. She followed my gaze and went still. The effort she had been making to stand disappeared, replaced by a quiet, practiced attempt to hide. Her hands trembled as she tried to pull the towel tighter, as if concealment mattered more than the pain in her body. I said nothing. I gathered more towels, layered them carefully, and helped her move inch by inch out of the bathroom and into the bedroom. I supported her weight in a way that avoided her back, though I didn't yet know why I knew to do that. I just did. Some part of me understood before my mind caught up. I laid her down gently on the bed, positioning pillows the way you do when you sense fragility without fully understanding it. Only then did I step back and let myself breathe. The emergency had changed shape. This was no longer just about a fall. I knelt beside the bed and checked her the way you do when you're afraid to make things worse by moving too fast. Ankles, knees, hips. Nothing obviously broken. Her breathing slowed as the shock eased, though every breath still sounded guarded, controlled. She kept her eyes fixed on the ceiling, not on me. Her hands stayed clenched in the towel like it was the last thing holding her together. That was when I saw her back clearly, without steam, without motion to blur it. The scars weren't chaotic. They were deliberate. Wide swaths of skin altered in layers, some darker, some pale and shiny, some pulled tight in a way that spoke of healing done long ago and imperfectly. This wasn't the aftermath of an accident. This was history, old, intentional, and carried for a lifetime. She noticed my stillness and reacted before I said a word. Her shoulders curled inward. She tried to roll onto her side away from me despite the pain it caused. Her instinct wasn't to ask if she was hurt. It was to disappear. "I'm fine," she said quietly, finally speaking. The words were automatic, reflexive, worn smooth by use. I just slipped. But her hands shook as she pulled the towel higher. That mattered more to her than the sharp intake of breath she couldn't quite hide. I reached for another blanket and draped it over her, slow and deliberate, giving her control back inch by inch. I didn't touch her back. I didn't ask questions. I covered what she wanted covered and adjusted pillows to keep weight off the damaged skin without naming it. I stood and told her I was getting ice and first aid supplies. Not asking. Telling. When I came back she hadn't moved. She lay exactly as I'd left her, still as if motion itself might reveal too much. I worked quietly, ice wrapped in cloth, a check for swelling, a careful assessment of what the fall had done and what it hadn't. The bruising was new. The pain was real. But the scars remained unchanged beneath the light pressure of my fingers near, not on them. Old injuries. Long healed. Long hidden. That was when the truth settled in me with an unexpected calm. Whatever had shaped her life enough to keep a door locked for decades did not happen in our house. It had come with her. It had followed her into marriage, into shared years, into a life that looked normal from the outside and was meticulously controlled within. I met her eyes for the first time since entering the bathroom. She watched me closely, waiting, not for comfort but for judgment. For revulsion. For the moment she had clearly rehearsed in her mind since long before she met me. I didn't give it to her. Instead, I adjusted the blanket again and said evenly, "The fall didn't cause those injuries." Her eyes closed. Not in relief. In resignation. The silence that followed was heavier than the impact I'd heard through the door. Because now we were standing at the edge of something she had spent her entire adult life making sure I never reached. I didn't push. Whatever that silence was made of, it had been holding her upright for most of her life. I sat at the edge of the bed and stayed there, close enough to matter, far enough to let her breathe. The ice melted slowly in the cloth. Time stretched in that way it does when something long buried is deciding whether it's safe to surface. She finally spoke without opening her eyes. Not to explain, only to warn. "Please don't make this a thing," she said. Her voice was steady, practiced. "I just need to rest." I told her I wasn't making anything into anything. I adjusted the pillow again, slid it under her hips so her back wouldn't touch the mattress directly. That small accommodation seemed to undo her more than any question would have. Her breath hitched. The careful control slipped for a moment. I asked if she could move her legs. She nodded. Asked if her head hurt. She shook it once. Every answer stayed narrow, contained. The conversation remained medical because that was safer ground. But beneath it, something had shifted. The door had already been broken. We both knew it. When I reached for the lamp and turned it lower, she flinched, not from the light itself, but from the idea of being seen more clearly. I dimmed it further and left it there. It wasn't accommodation anymore. It was understanding forming in real time. I told her I was going to stay in the room. Not because she needed monitoring but because I wasn't going anywhere. She didn't respond. Her hands loosened their grip on the towel just enough that I noticed. The question came out of me quietly, without accusation or urgency. "How long have you been carrying this alone?" Her eyes opened then. She looked at me the way someone looks when they're deciding whether to finally stop holding a door shut. Not angry. Not afraid. Just tired in a way that had nothing to do with the fall. She turned her face slightly toward the wall and said, "Since before I met you." That was all she could manage. It was enough. I nodded, not because I understood yet, but because I accepted that the explanation, if it came, would arrive on her terms. I changed the ice again. I checked the bruising once more. I made sure her weight stayed off her back. And in that quiet repetition of care, the marriage we'd been living, careful, respectful, partial, began to change shape into something slower and deeper. Something that would not ask her to hide first and heal second. I left the room once, only long enough to gather what I needed. First aid kit from the hall closet. Fresh ice. Clean sheets. The ordinary tools of care, assembled with a steadiness I didn't entirely feel. When I came back, she was exactly where I'd left her, eyes open now, staring at the dimmed lamp like it was a fixed point she could anchor herself to. I told her what I was doing before I did it. Every movement announced. Every touch deliberate and brief. Trust doesn't rebuild itself in declarations. It forms in small, predictable actions. I changed the sheets beneath her without asking her to lift more than necessary, sliding fabric inch by inch so her back never brushed the mattress directly. When I checked the bruising along her side, I used the back of my fingers and watched her face instead of the injury. Her reactions told me more than words. Not fear of pain. Fear of exposure. At one point as I reached for fresh ice, she said quietly, "You don't have to do all this." I answered without thinking. Yes, I do. Not because I was her husband. Because this was what should have happened a long time ago. Because care delayed doesn't stop being necessary, it just becomes overdue. When I finished, I sat back in the chair by the bed. Not looming. Not retreating. Present. The scars were still there, hidden now beneath layers of cloth but no longer invisible to me. And that knowledge didn't repulse or weaken what we had. It clarified it. I said it gently, not as a demand. Those injuries didn't come from one event. They came from someone. Her jaw tightened. That reflex again, to protect someone else even now. Even after everything. She nodded once. Not you, she said. Not anyone you know. That's not what I asked, I replied just as softly. Silence stretched. Her breathing changed. Slower, heavier, like a long-held weight-shifting position. It was a long time ago, she said finally. Another state. Another life. I waited. Didn't interrupt. Didn't fill the space. When you've lived with locked doors long enough, you learn that forcing them open only teaches people to build thicker ones. She swallowed. It was someone who was supposed to take care of me. The words landed without drama. No shaking. No tears. Just a statement shaped by repetition and restraint. But I felt it settle into me with a gravity that left no room for doubt. This wasn't something she had survived and moved past. This was something she had learned to live around. I leaned forward, not closer to her body but closer to the truth. And no one stopped it. That wasn't a question. She closed her eyes. No, she said. No one did. I stayed where I was. I didn't reach for her. I didn't tell her it was going to be all right. Those phrases are often said to end discomfort, not to honor it. Instead, I let the weight of what she'd said exist between us without trying to soften it. She was the one who broke the silence. I didn't fall today because I'm clumsy, she said. I fell because I panicked when I heard the door handle move. I thought back to that moment, the way she'd always locked the door, the way even a small sound outside the bathroom could make her go quiet. I had interpreted it as privacy. As preference. I saw now that it had been vigilance. She continued, still staring at the lamp. I learned early that locked doors were the only way to control what happened to my body. Once you learn that, it's hard to unlearn it. Even when the danger is gone. I nodded. My throat felt tight but my voice stayed steady. You weren't avoiding me, I said. You were protecting yourself. Her shoulders dropped slightly at that. Not relief exactly, but the release of being correctly understood. She told me then, in pieces at first, about the caregiver. Not a parent by blood but someone left in charge. Someone trusted. Someone who believed discipline could be taught with pain and silence. The burns hadn't been accidents. They had been punishments. Deliberate. Measured. Followed by instructions about secrecy and obedience that had lasted far longer than the injuries themselves. She spoke the way someone does when they've told the story before, but never to someone who would stay afterward. Dates blurred. Details stayed sharp where they needed to. She never used the word abuse. She didn't have to. When she finished, she waited again. This time not for judgment, but for confirmation of her oldest fear, that what had been done to her had made her unlovable. Untouchable. A liability she had managed carefully enough to keep hidden for decades. I stood and moved closer, stopping where she could see me clearly. This doesn't invalidate anything about us, I said. It explains it. Her eyes filled then. Not with tears yet. With disbelief. You didn't marry damaged goods, she said quietly. You married me. That was the moment the emergency fully changed shape. Because now the injury we were tending to wasn't her body. It was the belief she had been carrying alone for most of her life. Once she began, the rest came out with a steadiness that surprised me. Not because it was easy, nothing about it was, but because she had lived with the story so long that silence had already done its worst. Speaking it aloud didn't break her. It clarified her. She told me about the house in the other state. How ordinary it looked from the outside. How neighbors waved. How teachers assumed quiet meant well-adjusted. The caregiver had been careful. Never angry in public. Never sloppy. Pain delivered privately, followed by calm explanations about obedience and gratitude. About how some children needed stronger lessons than others. The burns were spaced out over time. Never enough at once to raise alarms. Treated at home until they couldn't be hidden, then explained away as accidents when the damage became too severe. A pot tipped. A heater malfunctioned. A story rehearsed until it sounded true. She told me about the hospital. The smell. The questions asked too gently. The way adults exchanged looks but didn't press. The caregiver cried in all the right places. Promised it would never happen again. And for a while it didn't. Not because of remorse, but because the lesson had already landed. No police report. No charges. No removal. Just a quiet agreement that some things were better left alone. That was when I learned, she said, that being believed wasn't guaranteed. And being seen could make things worse. After that, the scars became more than physical. They became proof of vulnerability. Evidence that could be used against her if the wrong person saw them. So she learned control instead. Clothing choices. Lighting. Locked doors. A body managed like a risk assessment. She moved out as soon as she could. Built a life that didn't ask questions. Learned how to be desirable without being exposed. How to be close without being visible. By the time she met me, the system was already complete. I never lied to you, she said. I just edited. I understood then that secrecy hadn't been about deception. It had been about survival refined into habit. A structure so stable it had lasted through courtship, marriage, shared years. I told her something I hadn't realized until that moment. You were never hiding from me, I said. You were hiding for yourself. She looked at me then, not guarded, not braced, but uncertain in a new way. As if she didn't yet know how to exist without the rules that had kept her safe. And that was when I knew the next part wouldn't be about uncovering the past anymore. It would be about learning how to live without locking the door. She told me what came next not as a confession but as an accounting. What happens after the hospital, after the questions that never turn into action, is not healing. It's instruction. You learn what the world is willing to ignore. She was sent back. Not immediately, but eventually. The caregiver changed tactics. No more visible injuries. Control became quieter, more psychological. Rules multiplied. Privacy disappeared. Punishment no longer needed fire to be effective. Fear did the work on its own. By the time she left that house for good, she already understood something most people never have to learn. That safety isn't guaranteed by adults, systems, or good intentions. It's engineered, maintained, guarded. She explained how the story was buried. How extended family accepted the version that was easiest. How silence became the price of keeping peace. Therapy was never offered. Counseling never suggested. The event was treated like an unfortunate chapter, not a defining injury. And because no one named it, it remained hers alone to carry. That's when the rules set in, she said. If no one intervenes, you don't give them another chance. So she didn't. She chose control over comfort. Predictability over vulnerability. By the time she met me, the habits were so ingrained they didn't feel like fear anymore. They felt like identity. She connected it all then, the courtship, the early years. Why she never let me see her in full light. Why intimacy always happened on her terms. Why locked doors weren't negotiable, and why even after decades she never forgot to turn the key. It wasn't about trust, she said. It was about exposure. Once someone sees what was done to you, you don't get to decide what they do with that knowledge. I thought of all the moments I'd misread. All the times I'd stepped back, thinking I was respecting her wishes, when in reality I'd been unknowingly reinforcing a belief she'd formed as a child, that safety only existed behind barriers. I told her something that felt important to say out loud. You didn't owe me access to your pain, I said. But you never owed it secrecy either. She lay there quietly after that, not responding, not withdrawing. Just absorbing the idea that the life she'd built to protect herself might finally be allowed to change. And for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't ask me to leave the room. Once the door was open, once the truth existed between us, it began to connect itself backward through our life together. Not dramatically. Methodically. Like a map finally making sense when the legend is revealed. She talked about our early dates. Why restaurants were always dim. Why afternoons stretched into evenings before intimacy ever happened. Why she flinched, not visibly but internally, when I reached for a light switch without warning. None of it had been rejection. It had been management. A careful choreography designed to keep her body from becoming evidence. She explained the rules she'd made long before me and never thought to revisit. Never be surprised. Never be fully visible. Never allow access that can't be immediately controlled. Lock doors. Control angles. Decide when and how skin is seen. Those rules had followed her into marriage not because she distrusted me, but because she didn't yet know another way to exist. I didn't think I was lying, she said. I thought I was being responsible. I believed her. The difference matters. I thought about how often I told myself that love meant patience, that respecting her boundaries was proof of my maturity. I saw now that patience without curiosity can sometimes look like indifference from the inside. That by never asking why, I had unknowingly helped keep the system intact. You didn't create this, she said as if reading the thought. You just lived around it. That was true. And it was also no longer enough. I told her then, plainly without reassurance or apology, that what she carried did not make our marriage fragile. It made it honest for the first time. That intimacy didn't begin with access to skin, but with the decision not to turn away once you finally see what someone has been protecting. She looked at me for a long moment, measuring whether this was another promise meant to sound kind and expire quietly later. Instead of answering, she did something small but monumental. She asked me to help her sit up. No towel tugged higher. No request to turn away. Just a practical need, stated plainly, and the trust that I would handle her body with the same care I had shown her truth. As I moved to support her, I understood that this slow, careful dismantling of old rules was the real beginning of our life together. What she expected, what she had clearly rehearsed for decades, was disappointment. Withdrawal. The subtle recalibration people make when they decide something is too much, too damaged, too inconvenient to fully accept. I could see her bracing for it even as she let me help her sit up, her body tense not from pain but from anticipation. So I said the thing that cut straight through the fear that had governed her silence. This doesn't change how I see you, I told her. It corrects it. She searched my face looking for hesitation. For the fine print people hide behind kindness. There was none. I wasn't trying to reassure her into calm. I was stating fact. For 23 years, I continued, you've been living as if your body was a condition I might someday reject. As if our marriage depended on me not knowing the full truth. That was never the case. Her eyes filled then, not with the sharp tears of pain but with something slower. Grief maybe. Or release. Or the exhaustion of holding a belief so long that letting go of it feels like stepping off solid ground. I thought if you saw everything, she said, you'd feel trapped. Like you married into something you didn't consent to. I shook my head just once. I married you, I said. Not the version of you that learned how to hide. That was the moment the power shifted. Not dramatically. Quietly. The way real change always happens. She didn't argue. Didn't deflect. She simply let herself lean into the support I was offering, physically and otherwise. Her weight settled against me with a trust that felt new, not because we lacked intimacy before but because this one didn't require strategy. For the first time since I'd known her, she didn't try to manage how she was being held. And in that stillness, I understood something I wish I'd known earlier. Love doesn't prove itself by how carefully you avoid someone's wounds. It proves itself by how steadily you stay once they're revealed. The change didn't arrive all at once. It wasn't dramatic or triumphant. It came in the smallest surrender, her allowing herself to stay where she was instead of retreating behind habit. She let me adjust the pillows without flinching. Let me help her drink water. Let the blankets fall where they fell without immediately correcting them. For years, her body had moved ahead of her trust, enforcing rules she no longer remembered choosing. Now, for the first time, she hesitated before following them. That hesitation mattered more than any declaration. At one point, she reached back instinctively to pull the blanket higher. Her hand stopped halfway. She looked at me, almost embarrassed by the pause. I don't have to, she said, more to herself than to me. No, I answered. You don't. The room felt different after that. Quieter but not tense. Like a house after a long storm when you realize nothing else is going to break. She asked me to stay close when she slept. Not watching, not guarding, just present. I sat beside the bed and listened to her breathing even out. When she shifted, she didn't apologize. When she woke briefly from pain or memory, she didn't turn away. This was the standoff breaking, not with tears or speeches but with permission. Permission to be helped. Permission to be seen without consequence. Later, when she was fully awake again, she said something I hadn't realized she'd been carrying. I thought if I ever stopped managing it, everything would fall apart. I understood what she meant. The fear wasn't that the past would return. It was that without constant vigilance, she wouldn't know who she was anymore. We'll learn it, I said. Slowly. She nodded. And for the first time since I'd known her, she didn't lock anything. Not a door. Not a moment. That night, the rules that had governed our marriage for decades loosened. Not because they were forced open but because they were finally no longer needed. The morning after didn't arrive with clarity or relief. It arrived quietly, the way difficult truths always do, without ceremony, without instruction. I found her already awake, sitting up against the headboard, the bathroom door open behind her for the first time I could remember. Not wide. Just open enough to exist. Caregiving stopped being an emergency and became a rhythm. We moved slowly. I helped her into the bathroom without asking permission in the old way, and without assuming access either. We negotiated each step with calm practicality. Where to stand. How to turn. Which light to use. When to pause. There was no shame in the process, but there was still sensitivity, like handling something that had been fractured and was only now being set correctly. I saw her back again that morning, fully this time in ordinary light. Not because I demanded it. Because she didn't hide. The scars were exactly what they had been the night before, but their meaning had shifted. They were no longer a threat to our life together. They were simply part of it. We adapted the space together. Extra padding on the mattress. Towels folded in specific ways to prevent friction. I learned how to help her wash without pressure on the damaged skin, how to move around her body instead of over it. She corrected me when I needed it. Not defensively. Practically. That too was new. What surprised me most was how quickly the house adjusted. The bathroom became shared without becoming exposed. The bedroom became functional without becoming clinical. Care entered our marriage not as a burden, but as a quiet extension of intimacy, one built on presence rather than performance. She no longer locked the door. Not because she forced herself not to, but because the need had lessened. Control was being replaced by trust, and trust by habit. That day she rested often. I stayed nearby. We spoke little, and when we did, it was about small things: water, temperature, comfort. The past had done enough talking for one lifetime. By evening, the shape of our marriage had changed in ways no one outside the room would ever notice. But inside it, something essential had shifted. We were no longer living around a wound. We were living with it, together. We waited before telling the children. Not out of fear, but out of care. There's a difference between secrecy and timing, and this time we chose together. She needed her footing first, needed to know that what had shifted between us would hold before we invited anyone else into it. When we did decide, I made the calls. Our children are grown, old enough to have noticed the locked doors, the patterns, the distance they never quite knew how to name. I didn't explain everything on the phone. I told them their mother had been hurt long before they were born, that it had shaped more than any of us understood, and that she wanted them to know, not as a burden but as context. There was silence on the line after that. The kind that means recalculation. Reframing. They came the next day. We sat together in the bedroom, not because she was confined there, but because it was where she felt most steady. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't soften it either. She spoke plainly about what had happened, about how it had followed her into adulthood, into motherhood, into a life that looked ordinary from the outside and was anything but simple inside. I watched our children listen. Watched understanding replace old misunderstandings. Years of quiet hurt. Why she pulled away, why she controlled space, why affection sometimes felt measured, realigned into something gentler. Something that didn't accuse. When she showed them her back, there was no gasp. No shock. Just a collective stillness and then closeness. One hand on her shoulder. Another at her side. Apologies spoken not for wrongdoing, but for not knowing how to see what had been hidden in plain sight. Later, after they left, she sat quietly for a long time. Exhausted but lighter. Telling the truth hadn't undone her. It had widened the circle of people who could carry it with her. That night, she slept without asking me to stay awake. And I understood then that healing doesn't mean forgetting what shaped you. It means no longer having to protect it alone. Time did what it always does when the body has carried too much for too long. It narrowed things. Her strength faded in increments so small they were easy to excuse at first. Longer rests, slower mornings, a carefulness that went beyond the scars we already knew. The doctor spoke in measured tones, using words like progression and management, never urgency. But I understood what they weren't saying. Care became more intimate then. Not just assistance but constancy. I learned the precise way her skin reacted to pressure, the places that needed cushioning, the movements that tired her fastest. The bathroom was no longer a place of isolation. It was shared space now, quiet, functional, unremarkable in the way safety should be. I helped her bathe without ceremony. Dressed her without averting my eyes. The body she had hidden for decades was no longer something she needed to negotiate around. Some days she talked about the past. Other days she didn't. I followed her lead. Healing didn't require completion. It required presence. As her health declined, the old reflexes tried to return. Not the fear but the instinct to manage my perception. She would apologize for needing help, for taking time, for resting. I stopped her every time. This isn't a burden, I told her. This is the life we're in. And she believed me. That was the quiet miracle. Not that she trusted me, I think she always had, in her own way, but that she finally trusted herself enough to stop guarding against a rejection that never came. When she slept, I stayed close. When she woke, she reached for me without hesitation. No locks. No rules. Just the ordinary intimacy of two people who had finally arrived at the same place, even if it had taken most of a lifetime to get there. Near the end she said something once, only once. I wish I'd known earlier that I could live like this. I didn't answer right away. Some truths don't need to be corrected. You lived the way you needed to, I said finally. And you're living this way now. That was enough. She did on a quiet morning. No urgency. No alarms. Just the slow stillness that settles when a body finally stops negotiating with pain. I was sitting beside her, holding a hand that had learned, late but fully, that it no longer needed to brace itself. The house was calm. The door was open. The days that followed moved the way days do after a long vigil, procedural, subdued, oddly efficient. Arrangements made. Calls returned. A funeral plan that reflected who she was to the world, not everything she had survived within it. The full truth remained mostly private. Not because it needed hiding anymore, but because it didn't need defending. People spoke about her kindness, her discipline, her strength. All true as far as they went. I listened and nodded and let them have the version of her they knew. Inside, I carried the fuller one. The woman who learned control before she learned trust, who lived half a life in preparation for a danger that never came again, and who finally, near the end, laid the armor down. At the graveside, I didn't think about regret. I thought about accuracy. About how our marriage, incomplete for so long, had found its truest form not in youth or ease, but in care freely given and finally accepted. About how intimacy isn't measured in years, but in the moments when someone stops hiding and finds they're still held. When I returned to the house afterward, I noticed something small. The bathroom door stood open. No reason for it to be closed anymore. No reason for it ever to have been locked again. I left it that way.